is that we have actually reduced our carbon emissions by 12% since 2006. So we are currently at 1994 levels. And I'm not saying that there's not a lot of work to do, but I do think it's important that the natural gas is displacing coal, and that's a positive. So in terms of the emissions from gas are less than from coal. There's still a lot of work to do, and we're doing, I think there are tremendous advancements happening in terms of efficiencies. So, as I said, I think there's a lot to be concerned about with regards to the climate. But at the same time, we have an economy, and we have a global economy that requires a huge amount of energy. And as much as I support renewable energy technologies, we're still not there yet.
Let's get stone players too.
Yeah, this is, you could say this is an example of short-term necessity crowding out what is the supreme long-term need.
Yeah,
so
but I also think it's really important to, if you look at solar and you look at wind, there are tremendous advancements. It's become much cheaper. So when you look at electricity generation, and I'm looking at John Bradley here, who, we're radically changing what's going into our grid, and there's much more renewable going into the grid. So again, less coal, more natural gas. It's long term. I think it's ultimately better.
Well, so
in the short term.
Well, it's still true that if we continue on the trend that we're on now, when CGA has its 20th anniversary, if we have it in this auditorium, we're all going to be wearing scuba suits.
It's not just, I think, as amazing as the shale revolution has been and will continue to be, you ain't seen nothing yet, frankly. As amazing as that is, what's even more significant is just how unexpected it was. Donald Rumsfeld used to talk about the unknown unknowns. The fact that our entire energy picture, in such a huge industry, in such an incredibly important area with so much expertise, could be revolutionized by technological developments in combination with a sort of capitalist financial system and distributed rights that allowed a kind of entrepreneurial set of independent companies to experiment and go forward. The most significant thing isn't just the energy, as amazing as that is. It's what the hell is the next fracking thing going to be? There are going to be changes technologically, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's 4D printing, whether it's synthetic biology, whether it's improvements in battery technology, which will allow the grid to do even more kinds of stuff and bring renewables in. We don't know what's coming down the pike on the upside. And yes, we worry about the new things that will happen on the downside from the super empowered individuals who could do bad things. But, for the first time in a century, the basic question of what's going to power transportation is in play, right? We had an article in the spring by a serious expert saying that by 2030, probably half the vehicles in the U.S. fleet are going to be electric. That's an astonishing idea. And by then, half the damn cars or more will be driving themselves. And that we don't even, this kind of stuff, the technological aspects of change and positive stuff is only going to accelerate. It's geometric, it's logarithmic, it's not arithmetic. And it's not just finding a new gas field. You talk about Central Asia. We used to talk about the Caspian Basin, right? That was a big thing 10 years ago. Screw the Caspian Basin. Because it's just a big field with a pot of oil under it. Now you can have technological development that'll get more out of the existing.
So it's intoxicating to hear about a kind of self-perpetuating positive cycle. Nevertheless, when we think about the fact that these climate issues are not national, they're purely global. If the United States helps, that really is good. But absent the capacity to reach some kind of mutual understanding, which includes both Western countries, which are doing great things, and third world countries, which, whatever good things they do, are more than canceled out by the fact of their growth, and thus their increasing use of carbon and so forth, of coal, I'm sorry, raises a political question, which is there reason to feel confident that on climate, but I would say not even only on climate, on other kinds of global issues, nuclear non-proliferation, things like that there is anything like a will, this is something Obama has been trying very hard ever since he arrived in 2009 and had very little success on, that there is a will for the kind of collective action without which it's very hard to see the way to solve the problem. Anybody have any thoughts on that big question?
Well, I mean, just in terms of climate, and Phil was talking about, in terms of international development, and Obama has just recently said that all international development assistance will have a climate resiliency component, and that's part of, something that the United States government is doing. I think China, which is, the world's largest emitter of carbon emissions, it's facing a very hard reality in terms of that they cannot continue doing what they're doing. They have to change. They have to start moving away from coal, and they're doing that. They're doing that partially through natural gas. So I'm not really answering their question in terms of what is the possibility or the likelihood of sort of global international cooperation.
You're saying it's necessary, but of course many necessary things don't happen.
Well, yeah, I do think it's necessary, and I think we do have to have we have to be doing more. But at the same time, I think the United States is sort of moving forward, and as I pointed out earlier, our own emissions, have gone down and will continue to go down. I mean, in terms of forecasts are that we will, go down another 5-6%, by 2020.
But I'm right about the upsides of technological progress, because all the other methods of dealing with the problem have zero hope of success. You're never going to get international agreement. You're never going to get significant changes. You're never going to get painful, costly economic adjustments. So I hope we don't have to go to geoengineering. I hope we can do changes in the technology of energy itself that will help deal with the problem. But if I'm wrong about the upsides of the technological progress, then we really are screwed.
Well, it's a matter of degree. You have to be really, really, really right, because obviously the problem is very urgent. So let me end by asking each of you to do this. So Gideon began by setting a tone, and I think the tone was, it's too easy to get mired in all the terrible stuff that's happening, and if you look on balance, you'll think, actually, trends are more positive than negative. So I'd like to ask each of you just to talk for a moment about the things in the world that you find encouraging and the things in the world that you find discouraging or despairing, and if you'd like, your kind of intuitive sense about what the balance between the good stuff and the bad stuff is. So, Philip, I'm afraid I'm going to start with you because you're next again.
Just to avoid your question for a second, in terms of international cooperation, Ebola is a central issue because it highlights the extent to which we have blocked that out as a problem affecting a few benighted African countries and nothing to do with us. But I think that there are loads of global health issues which will demand a much more sophisticated and developed international or global health regime. The World Health Organization has just been weakened basically considerably in recent years. We've been happy to see the Gates Foundation and others taking over. I think that's a real problem. I think we need to build up cooperation there. You mentioned human rights before. I can take up your opportunity. Obviously, I think that what I call the human rights revolution in terms of the empowerment of women, in terms of putting those issues on the international agenda big time, is extremely important and is going to play a big role in various societies coming to realize that the authoritarian regimes, and I would include the ISISes and others of the world, don't offer them what they increasingly are demanding. And so we need, as a society, as a country, the United States and its allies, to be pushing much more strongly for the strengthening of the human rights regime.
Like Gideon, I am sort of an optimist about the power of technology to transform our world. 10 years ago, we were all using much more primitive forms of telephone communication. There were even social evolutionary biologists who theorized that maybe we would grow much longer thumbs evolutionarily to deal with our BlackBerries. I think very few of us currently use BlackBerries. We're living in the middle of a revolution right now in technology. And we don't know whether we're at the beginning of it, or the middle of it, or the end of it. But of 7 million people, of the estimated 7 million people who live in the world, the UNS, billion, sorry, billion people live in the world. An estimated, there are 6.8 billion cell phone subscriptions. This is from a UN technology agency. People who don't have running water have cell phones. People in refugee camps have cell phones. The UN has a group called UN Global Pulse is able to kind of do early warning about famine and drought and crises by just analyzing cell phone pattern behavior from the developing world. So I find all of that fascinating, encouraging. I don't know where we'll be in 10 years technologically. I don't know what we'll be using, but I do remain hopeful about that. The things that worry me are, like Philip, I'm very concerned about public health issues. I think that the advances that we've made in some spheres in biomedical research have also had a kind of counter effect. Antibiotic resistance has created a whole new bugs that have the power to infect and kill people. I'm very concerned about our commitment and the world's commitment to these public health issues.
I'm optimistic, as you can tell, about the power of technology in a whole variety of areas to make dramatic improvements in life in a lot of different ways. I'm pessimistic or worried about the stagnancy and sclerosis of our political institutions in the advanced industrial world that seem to be unable to provide effective governance and effective policy approaches to a whole variety of things. We have a very sobering piece by Frank Fukuyama, a current issue of Foreign Affairs taken from his new book that is all about the decay of the American political system, and I sort of stagnant, sliding in place and admire while the world goes on. We're doing better than others, but that's not a very optimistic thing to be at the end of history and have your institutions suck. And I have to say, if I'm wrong, I worry that I may be wrong about the climate stuff. In other words, if I look down the road and I think one of the things that are really big game changers in a negative way, the way other people used to worry a little more about nuclear weapons. I never worried that much about nuclear proliferation, frankly, but I worry that I may be wrong and overly complacent about climate because I don't think we're going to do anything on the international institutional front. If the gloom and doomsayers are correct, then we really are going to be in big trouble.
I listened to Gideon's opening keynote and to his subsequent comments, and I kept thinking to myself, I thought I was an optimist. I think I am an optimist, actually. Maybe not quite to the degree that Gideon is, but at the moment I'm spending my time building up a small journalistic organization that's focused on the criminal justice system. And even in that sadly dysfunctional excuse for a justice system, I can see causes for optimism. Among other things, it's one of the very few places in our political life where there is actually some overlap between right and left about the need to reform mass incarceration. So that's a good thing. I put some hope in technology, not quite as much as I think Gideon does. I put considerable hope in generational change. I think the millennials have interest and attitude, whether they become active, whether they sort of attach their idealism to causes and go out and fight for them is yet to be seen, but that makes me optimistic. The two things that worry me, I guess, are criminal justice aside, the polarization of our politics, and not just in the United States, but globally, and complacency.
I'd like to end on a positive note, so I'll start with the things that worry me, and I'll finish with the things that I'm hopeful about. Climate is definitely something I'm very concerned about. I think that the climate is changing. I think there are many parts of the world, including right here, where we're not doing enough to create the resiliencies that we need. I'm very frightened by the dysfunction in government. I read as Gideon was pointing out, in terms of the most recent issue of Foreign Affairs and the dysfunction and the decay, and that frightens me. That